Hi, everyone, and welcome to this next episode of the Sustainable Connections podcast. I'm Mark Lee. I'm the Global Director of Thought Leadership at ERM. If you are a regular listener to the podcast, you will have heard my voice before. And in that case, welcome back. And if not, we're really delighted to have you as a listener here today. If you've chosen to join the podcast for the first time, just a tiny bit of context. We call the podcast Sustainable Connections because we think that many of the big challenges in the sustainability space kind of can't be solved alone. Not any one individual or organization can overcome these biggest planetary challenges. So the connection, collaboration, partnership elements of work in this field are really important. And in that spirit, we often sort of showcase some partners and partnerships that ERM has had the opportunity to be part of. Today's conversation is very much in the spirit of that. The kind of framing article for our conversation today is a relatively recent report that was generated by WBCSD and ERM and other partners called Towards Planet Positive Chemicals, a chemical transformation roadmap enabled by the circular economy. So big mouthful, lots of words. We'll unpick that in a moment. But if we'll probably shorthand it to chemical transformation or chemical transformation roadmap as we go. But more important than the title of that report is who I'm going to talk about the report with and have a great cross-section of people to have that conversation today. So 3 guests with me on today's episode. One is Anne-Laure Brison, who is the Senior Manager of the Chemicals Group at WBCSD. Second is Titta Rosvall-Puplett from Syensqo, where she is the Chief Sustainability Officer. And then third is one of my colleagues and another partner here at ERM, Cristina Pellegrino, who's also our global industry lead for chemicals. So really tied into this chemical transformation work. I'd love to have each of you actually tell everybody a little bit more about your role and maybe something about your role that you really love, a part of the work that's motivating and interesting for you in the moment. And Anne-Laure, if I could turn to you to do that first. Welcome.
Thank you, Mark, for the warm welcome. So I lead all the work we do in WBCSD on chemicals as well as product sustainability. And what I really love about the work I do is to engage with thought leaders and explore with them how we can use the power of collective action to create impact.
Sounds perfect for Sustainable Connections then. So glad for that little alignment. Titta, how about you?
Thanks so much. Yeah, I'm really proud and happy to lead Syensqo's corporate sustainability function actually as Chief Sustainability Officer. And I love to work with so many different experts and engineers and scientists in our company and partner together on solutions and also external partners. I think we talk about that a little later. And that really drives me, and it's really is a little bit like what Anne-Laure says, the impact we can drive together.
Yeah, super satisfying when that comes together. And I'm sure there'll be some folks listening who don't know Syensqo well. We will come back to that and talk in a little more depth about your organization later too, Titta.
Yes.
Christina, though, let's let you introduce yourself at this point.
Thanks, Mark. I co-led the WBCSD efforts in developing the chemical transformation roadmap with various companies and various stakeholders across the value chain, leading globally the chemical industry. The part that I'm enjoying the most is really working closely across the industry with companies, with organizations such as WBCSD to make an impact and to shift the industry to the level where we can really state is now sustainable industry.
Fantastic. And thanks so much to all 3 of you for giving up the time here. We're chatting across time zones from Europe to California today. So it's a bit of a negotiation logistically to get it all together, but I'm really glad we're pulling it off. Let's plunge in. And Anne-Laure, I'm going to come back and I'm going to start with you and I'm going to return to the report. So we've got Towards Planet Positive Chemicals. Why this report at this time? And I'm sure we've got listeners out there who are more and less sophisticated in terms of the chemicals industry. So can you talk a little bit about what sustainability and nature positive maybe mean in the context of the chemical industry?
Well, actually, I'm a chemical engineer, so I'll use that allegory to say it's been the catalyst of 18 months journey. And what that catalyst is a strong emphasis on building resilience in business that's inherited by the COVID pandemic, of course, and that has been obviously reinforced by the Ukraine war since 2022. It's also been anchored into the acknowledgement of two key facts. On one hand, if we look from healthcare to energy, from mobility to communication, more than 95% of all the manufactured products and material rely on industrial chemical processes. That means chemicals are crucial for the global economy. But there is a but. The industrial production and use of chemicals contribute to significant global greenhouse gas emissions and environmental degradation. So that has been the driver for 9 leading companies, including Syensqo, to join forces in WBCSD with the support of ERM to shape this roadmap to transform how chemicals are produced, used, disposed, and recycled. And in that context, there is no universal answer to define what sustainable chemicals are. That's also what motivated our work. As part of this, we have built a shared vision on what sustainable chemical system is, because it goes way beyond just the industry. And we define it as a system that is net zero and nature positive and achieve and maintains this status through a just transition. To make that happen, we need to empower the circular economy, demonstrate and scale up sustainable chemistry as a solution, and of course, address pollution.
And Anne-Laure, so much there, but that stat is almost impossible, right? The 95% of our industrial processes rely on these chemicals. It underscores they are essential, but the negative impacts are also really substantial. Can you give us one or two examples of specific challenges that the industry is facing and how the report starts to say you can overcome these?
The business case shape that sustainable chemical ecosystem is really rooted into the challenges that not only that industry, but the value chain relying on chemical are facing. And it's very similar to the broad WBCSD global business community. We recognize that sustainability performance is now a key driver for competitiveness. So while geopolitics can influence how business communicate and plan for future, while there is some uncertainty, which is natural on when policy may shift, the core remain the same. Smart businesses understand that it is key to take into account any material opportunity and risk that can affect the performance and the growth of companies. And we believe that addressing issues like climate change, restoring nature, and key societal challenges will continue to be key to stay competitive. And this is completely applicable to the chemical ecosystem. What we need for that is to craft a supporting environment to move from the current supply, asset-based, the solutions and the business model toward that net zero nature positive vision. And again, as I mentioned, enabling circular economy, scaling sustainable chemistry, tackling pollution are crucial to enable that move.
Thank you. And Titta, maybe I'm going to turn to you. And I said we'd come back to Syensqo. And I'd love to do maybe two things together. One is, can you just tell people a bit more about the company, which spun off from Solvay in 2023? So it's a new company with a long heritage, might be how we think about it. But then in the context of the report and what Anne-Laure has just been running through, how is Syensqo working towards sustainability transformation? How does this actually play out at an individual company level?
Yeah, Syensqo, as you said, we're a specialty chemicals company and just over 12 months old, actually, following the successful demerger from Solvay. And, as you said, our legacy and history really dates back 160 years. It's incredible. We operate across 30 countries with 62 manufacturing sites around the world and 12 research and innovation hubs as well. So invest in a lot on R&I, so research and innovation as well. We are very close to our customers today, and we're headquartered in Brussels, in Belgium. And today, 41% of our customer share and sales are in the Americas, and 36% in Asia, and 23% in Europe. So we really operate globally. And I see this future for us and what Anne-Laure just explained, really the role of chemistry and chemicals, being part of the solution, I really see the future is exciting because we can drive that and we can enable sustainability for our customers and therefore for society. Let me give you a few examples. We're in multiple applications and we use chemistry to enable lightweighting or electrification or addressing resource scarcity even. And because we particularly use innovation and science to and commercialize these innovations, we drive some of the key really societal trends that impact our lives every day. We're in semiconductors, we're membranes in your smartphones, or we're in aerospace, enabling lightweighting as a body parts for airplanes, and battery materials, in your EV batteries. Every other EV battery have some of our materials in them, and even in medical devices, right? So chemistry can be used in so many different ways, and we're doing just that. And I see really this as an opportunity to transform also sustainability, but also transform businesses. And for us in Syensqo, sustainability is really central to what we do. On the one hand, we recognize that our long-term success is absolutely intrinsically linked to the health of a broader social and environmental ecosystems within which we operate. But sustainability is also good for our business and profitability. I just explained some of the applications and the products that we provide our customers with. So in a way, we are practically, part of the solution. And I like to discuss with my team as well at times is, when we focus on higher yields with lower impact, we're operating by default, you would say, more efficiently, and we regenerate resources and we build resilience, and that alone enables long-term growth. And I'd like to see more of that in our sector.
Yeah, that combination is the winner, right? When we can do more with less and ideally faster as well. I wonder, Titta, if I can lead you to go a step further and maybe tell us about one specific nature or sustainability goal that you've set and how the company kind of maps out a path to that target.
I see, and we all see, I think, is everything in our planet is connected, and certainly in the nature. And in the same way, I'd like to see companies like what we do in Syensqo is our sustainability is integrated into the business. And therefore, there is no sustainability strategy. There is one strategy. That's the company strategy that includes sustainability, in fact, and it's integrated. We took nature at very heart. We've been working on biodiversity actions and water and waste and pollution for years. And now in Syensqo, we actually just last year launched our very first target on nature. And we address water scarcity particularly. So here we really aim for reducing freshwater intake by an average of 20% by 2030 compared to 21 baseline. And this is interesting because we look at specifically sites that are experiencing water availability challenges. So we can go to the point where the hotspots are. And we're doing this by really putting in place action plans with our business and our site leadership and management, and installing water stewardship roadmaps that we will equip across 15 sites across the world. And these sites represent 90% of our whole water intake across the group. So, I think this is just one very concrete example how we're addressing on our end nature very concretely. And yeah, I mean, there is more, we're increasing our attention on broader environmental stewardship.
The water example is a great place to start, I think. And I love the way you took it from the overarching 20% reduction, but we have to refine that at every one of the 15 sites to make it specific to the local water challenges. And so many nature targets need to be broken down in that way, so many overarching sustainability ones as well. So great place to start. Cristina, from one company, maybe out to the industry. The industry, is it all aligned on this kind of transformation? And how much of a step change is this going to beg of the industry as a whole to go through this kind of transformation?
I would say a significant step change is needed. If you think about the 6 pathways that Anne-Laure has highlighted, the 3 imperatives, the 3 transformational enablers, they are elements that require a step in collaboration and industry engagement. Okay, we know that the chemical industry is well known for being competitive, and we also know that there are fragmented efforts towards the sustainability goals. However, companies now need to collaborate more effectively within and beyond the industry. So, across a much wider group of stakeholders, regulators, suppliers, NGOs, customers, to really try to build industry wide solutions. And this might include common standards, development for sustainable practices. It might include the data sharing or even co-developing infrastructure for things like recycling or waste management. So the collaborative mindset embracement is really crucial. The second one that comes to my mind, and has been a debate in many workshops and discussions that were held throughout the development of the chemical transformation roadmap, is the shift of mindset to circularity, which is really key. Okay, moving from an attitude of production disposal to design for reusability and sustainability, implementing more circular business models that really focus on the entire life cycle of the chemicals and the materials. I would also say that innovation in products and technologies is key to align with goals that the roadmap have set. And therefore, the fact that companies really need to integrate quicker sustainable design principles into the product innovation. So maybe even accelerate the development of low carbon or carbon neutral processes. And we will touch, I'm sure, later, but there is a challenge associated to that, the financial challenge, the investment challenge versus the timing of return. And then I think there is one last element that was identified that is very important, the just transition that Anne-Laure mentioned, so the social impact. So looking into the inclusion of better labor practices, the community engagement. So there is more proactiveness required from the companies in addressing societal concerns, in working towards a just transition with workers, communities, and really paying more attention to these dimensions of sustainability.
So what I hear you saying, Cristina, is it's going to be simple and quick. I mean, no, actually, right?
Yeah.
That there are so many things in that list, from the mindset to the behavior shift that has to go with it, to new business models in places, to a different kind of engagement with society. Anne-Laure, now that Cristina's teed up these incredibly difficult questions, I'm going to come back to you for some answers. It sounds like, there's no way this happens at an individual company level. And so I wanted to ask you about portfolio transformation. And if this is going to happen across the value chain, what does that look like? And where do the companies who are participating in the value chain transformation start their work?
That's actually a great question. And I'd like to start with one thing that may not be super obvious for our listener, but unlike in fuel or energy, in the material world, sustainable material in general do not benefit from regulatory mandates or regulatory driven incentives. That's why the shift really rely on market demand so far. And it's true that we're seeing growing actors across the value chain calling for sustainable solutions. But what we see lacking is, on one hand, a clear demand aggregation and signaling for sustainable solutions. And on the other hand, a harmonized language on sustainable products. Portfolio transformation is really a cornerstone for companies to implement climate, nature, and social equity goals. It's to meet the sustainability commitments companies have done, they need to get more granular and to look into their portfolio. That's why it's so important. But when you do so, it's getting quite easily overwhelming. So it's really important to strive to reduce complexity while integrating holistically sustainability action into business decisions. And of course, that requires a value chain perspective, which means building trust, collaboration, but also creating a harmonized language, which doesn't exist today. With this said, how do we get started? And what does portfolio transformation means? It usually starts with understanding the material sustainability related risk and opportunity that exist in the offering. And that must be done considering all the stages of a product lifecycle. Then you would categorize product group according to their sustainability performance, and then turn that into insights and actions. And what I mean here is strategic and operational decision making that can include developing new innovative products, mitigating issues identified, or even phasing out some of those worst performing products. And an effective way to get started is to set up a dedicated portfolio sustainability assessment and steering process. That's what we've observed companies do. But it's also super important to stay pragmatic on the way. We've seen companies start from various ends, from starting at high level and doing a portfolio scan and then getting more granular over time. Others start first with innovation or with a business unit where you have identified appetite for portfolio transformation and then scale in steps. But across the board, what they all say, all our members who practice those type of portfolio transformation processes say is it's important to mobilize cross-functional teams in the organization as well as leveraging all the data that already are available. I wanted to finish answering your question with stressing to our podcast listener the importance to consider a broad set of driver to really avoid burden shifting. That's where portfolio assessment and steering brings value to companies because it helps scanning risk, prioritizing actions, investments, and innovation efforts, while ultimately reducing the level of complexity that are required when you try to integrate sustainability into business decisions.
Thank you. There's such an interesting arc in there, and the required rigor of the portfolio assessment and its depth is pretty complex, but in a way we're aiming to do that to get to a reduced level of complexity and maybe clarity moving forward. Cristina, I want to bring this to you as well. And Anne-Laure mentioned there's not really a regulatory driver here. It needs to be more market driven. If there's an absence of regulatory push to support this transformation, it just made me curious, what other obstacles are there that the industry is facing in terms of embracing and then moving forward on this transformation pathway?
Perhaps we should talk about what opportunities the chemical companies might have in transforming their portfolio. And I'm sure Titta, can share later about some of the success that Syensqo has with their sustainable products. However, in terms of challenges, clearly these often stem from the complexity of the operation, the need for significant capital investments, and also the pressure of balancing sustainability with profitability. So there might be, as I mentioned earlier, high capital costs for sustainable innovation. So if you think about the transition to more sustainable practices and technology, like bio-based feedstock, CCS, or even sustainable chemistry, often require significant upfront investments, and returns that might take years to materialize. So potentially companies can quicker explore green finance option like green bonds, ESG investing, but also looking into collaboration with industry peers, research institutions, and maybe even startup on joint R&D initiative so that they can somehow reduce those associated costs. The other one is the gap associated to technology and infrastructure. The transition to new technologies could require significant upgrades or even completely new infrastructures. And maybe the way to approach this for companies is really almost a staged approach, okay, into existing technology, gradually scaling up investment in new solutions. And again, here, what better than collaborating with external partners? Think about equipment manufacturers, technology providers, or even innovation hubs, and really try to accelerate the adoption of these, let me use the word, cleaner, more efficient technologies. So those are elements. There is one third element that comes up often, and is the potential cultural resistance to change. Some well-established companies might face internal resistance to change, in particular where employees or management are accustomed to traditional practices and where sustainability is seen as a secondary element to take into consideration. Everything associated to organizational culture can present a barrier to the transformation. And again, here, what is the best way to address it? Strong leadership. Titta, Syensqo is a great example on this, where sustainability is really embedded into the way you operate. Building that culture by engaging employees at all levels, incentivizing sustainable behavior, and creating clear goals and rewards can definitely help organization with the transformation agenda.
And Titta, Cristina almost threw the next question to you in her closing there, and I'd like to make that official. So many things on the table, from the upfront investment costs, the period of return, how to begin collaboration with industry partners and with other providers, like for technology, and then these questions of culture. So in the context of all of that, can you tell us a bit more about Syensqo's portfolio strategy and how you're navigating that difficult terrain in moving towards a sustainable portfolio for yourself?
Lots been said. I think, if we, both Cristina and Anne-Laure talked about proactive approach, right? And I'd like to lean on that, because in the end, it comes down to that, having the foresight to either it means cultural change, shift, but also the foresight to understand what questions to ask. And for us, really, I think, in Syensqo, when we look at particularly portfolio transformation, I tend to think when we focus on lower impact or renewable-based products, for instance, those enhance our customer operations and therefore contribute to our top line growth. And by doing so, we're signaling the market that this is possible. And I think in all this complexity, it's also critical. I tend to always try to think, how can we simplify things without making things simple? And, in this complex world, but being concrete and very targeted. In our portfolio, for instance, natural and bio-based polymers that are used for consumer care, and perhaps polymers that use recycled raw materials from the beginning. And these are used for automotive or consumer devices. All of this supports circular economy, and this is who we are, what we do. And another example on how we incorporate sustainable portfolio transformation is also in lightweighting and composite materials, particularly for aerospace. And all of this advances clean mobility, and therefore actually give these examples for our customers and the society, how we can jointly and together create value and share success together. I spoke a little bit about circularity and solutions. We actually have set ourselves a target for circularity. So we aim for 18% circular sales by 2030. And this is really defined as how we enable circularity for our customers. And today we're at 16% of our goal, in fact. And on solutions, we're using a sustainable portfolio management tool that helps us to really make business decisions based on what is sustainable. And today, 80% of our innovation pipeline is focused on creating sustainable solutions. So we're using tools to help our decision making internally. And actually, today, a share of sales on sustainable solutions represents 63% of our revenue based on 24 performance. And it's interesting here when you look at these numbers and trajectories to these portfolios that I just mentioned. They show year-on-year resilient growth. And I like to look forward to look at how can this be actually further accelerated, because it really demonstrates this is possible. And the way we look at this is really, okay, here are our solutions, this is our innovation. I think we also need to look beyond that and look at the value chain-wide approach proactively, so, right? So let me give an example. For instance, we aim to be carbon neutral by 2040. And we're halfway there with our 2030 carbon reduction targets. Actually, these 2030 carbon reduction targets were validated by Science Based Targets Initiative just recently. I'm not going to lie to say this is easy. It isn't. It's really hard. And for most companies like ours, Scope 3 represents a lion share of carbon emissions. And when we talked about proactivity, I'd like to mention we looked at this challenge and looked at where the carbon emissions particularly sit, and we learned that it really is in our top key suppliers. So, in order to bring our suppliers on board on the net zero journey, if you wish, we've just launched a supplier climate pledge that targets our top 70 key suppliers. And these actually represent 80% of our carbon emissions in our raw materials that we procure. So I think working in this way, where you look at what really is material for you, working in partnership internally, I work hand in hand with our chief procurement officer and his team to really make things like this happen. And then working also together with our suppliers. I think it's just one example where, we talked a little bit about the market demand, creating market demand, right? So examples like this, I'm really hopeful that can help to create the market push and pull at the same time, right? Depending on which part of the value chain you sit. By taking such proactive approach to manage resource scarcity and the value chain up front, I think is the way to go. And, obviously over time, to see the result and impact. And just finally, I think this is Syensqo doing it. Imagine, we would do this sector-wide, what would the impact be, right? The ripple effect we can create across the value chain. I think it would be amazing to see, but maybe more on that later.
That's definitely where the magic will be. But I was really encouraged, Titta, to just hear how number specific you were able to be. It takes these targets and these ambitions from a theoretical or a broadly stated goal and really shows people the progress that's being made against whether that's your circular economy goal or your carbon neutral target. And fantastic to hear that detail and how it's playing out, actually, including the supply chain engagement. I'd love to switch a little bit, and there's considerable emphasis in the report on nature positive. I mean, I'm sure that there'll be folks listening who are like, chemical industry and nature positive, these are not synonyms for me. So how is that going to happen? I'm going to throw one question at each of you in almost a little speed round. So, Anne-Laure, you're going to get nature positive. Titta, you're going to get environmental stewardship. And Cristina, we're going to talk about remediation, but just a quick hit on each. Anne-Laure, starting with you, if there's a need to transform portfolios to not just reduce impact, but to be able to start demonstrating restoration of the natural environment, what's an example of how chemicals companies are stepping up on nature restoration and remediation?
Well, let me start by saying that this industry, the chemical industry, built on solid environmental health and safety policy. But as you laid that out already, nature positive require much more, and to go beyond just product safety compliance to really reversing nature loss, restoration and regeneration of ecosystem. We see great individual progresses, and Titta has mentioned how they set up target for their freshwater intake and implementing that through the 15 priority sites. What we see required to really step up is to get the narrative right, to mobilize the C-suite on the nature action agenda, because today we're not there yet. To then prioritize key actions, and that needs to be done considering all stages of the life cycle, from extraction to disposal and resource regeneration for chemicals. And both consider the current state, but most importantly, the decarbonized scenario to ensure that when companies prioritize actions that support their transition. And because what get measured get done, it's also important to select the priority metrics that helps tracking those progress. So this is the necessary foundation to really change scale on nature loss. And that's where we helping companies to progress, make sure that they develop nature positive strategies without burden shifting, that focus on remediate and restoring nature. And it's incentivize also the shift to a well-functioning circular economy, because the two are completely linked. And that's again part of the work that we do this year and that we will do next year. And I hope will come with a new publication very soon on the progress that we together with our members are making.
Awesome. We'll have to have you back to talk about that future publication too. Titta, again, we talked a little bit about Syensqo and how, a brand new company, but with, a century and a half legacy behind it in a sense. So how did you define or redefine environmental stewardship for Syensqo in launching the new entity? And does it make you all the more convinced, I hope, that nature positive is attainable for the industry?
We really see ourselves as responsible stewards of our environment. And it's really also how we ensure business continuity, right? In a responsible way. And while, of course, we comply with all relevant local, national, and international environmental laws and regulations, it's really important to take the necessary action to reduce be it substances of concern or very high concern emissions and effluents, right? And there I like to often think about, how we manage our footprint and how we proactively accelerate our handprint. And we really see ourselves as long-term being able to pioneer environmental stewardship within our sector. And part of this is through, as I mentioned, managing our footprint, mitigating pollution and waste, particularly around substances of very high concern and hazardous waste. But also part of that is through our handprint, right? So the approach to proactively to innovate. And we've actually have been innovating to find alternatives for substances that may trigger concern, with the current focus on phasing out use of fluorosurfactants. And this is since 2019, we've quadrupled our investment in research and innovation in this area to invent a new polymerization process using non-fluorosurfactant technologies efficiently, and therefore using resources and investing in nature regeneration. So again, beyond water and waste and pollution, we're also looking at our process engineering and efficiencies within which, and I think it's a holistic approach with very targeted actions.
Terrific. It's so different to hear companies talking about investing in regeneration and that assertion that that's a good thing for the company and the environment. And fantastic. And it'll be so interesting to watch you move forward there, Titta. Cristina, a little bit different than regeneration is the remediation challenge. And, let's be honest, cleaning up existing pollution in chemicals value chains, in any value chain, it's hard. It can be costly and it's not always easy to do well. So what's the best way for the industry going forward to address contamination and remediation responsibly?
So linking it to what Titta mentioned around innovation, I guess by setting the innovative mindset, there are three elements that are key. The clear definition of the objective. So the firms that really address the liabilities well are the ones that have clear strategic and business objectives for their portfolio across the sites, including specific objectives for each site. And how this might evolve with time. That depends, but clarity is key. And they can be a combination of elements. They can look into cash flow, risk mitigation and reduction, compliance, reputation, M&A, reverse, everything. The second element is probably the comprehensive implementation plans that needs to be developed. And of course, this at the most fundamental level, they need to adhere to the applicable regulation or adopt suitable standards where regulation do not exist. But these actions and the remedies should really consider a mix of stakeholders' input that goes beyond just regulators and responsible parties. really looking into the social and community aspects of the entire remediation. And then I think one other element is selecting the right partners. There might be consultants, there might be remedial technology firms, but this needs to be somehow involved more than just as a service providers. They need to really be able to partner with the companies to co-develop the strategy, implement the plan, implement effectively the plans so that they can deliver the expected outcome. And then I would say that one element that is becoming more of a focus is the adoption of a circular economy principle in the approach to remediation.
Cristina, you've led a little bit to where I wanted to go as we wrap up. And we've been talking in the context of chemical transformation. We've been talking about it in the context of the whole value chain and the role of suppliers. And in your last comments there, of course, you took us into the social and community impacts or effects as well, and the need to engage almost beyond the direct value chain to the folks and the communities that are impacted by all of the change and the activity within it. So Anne-Laure and Titta, maybe I'll ask you to close out on this, is a final thought on where and how to extend collaboration to help increase the chances of success and of working through all this faster. And how about I go to Titta first, and Anne-Laure will give you the last word.
I think it's quite clear what we've discussed here today. Collaboration throughout the value chain is really key, but also I think it goes beyond our sector, right? I think where we look at sustainable solutions that protect the environment, it also helps the society and the planet. That's a given. And at times we need to really look at beyond our own ecosystem to do so. We at Syensqo, we partner particularly with some important organizations such as Ellen MacArthur Foundation that has been known to advance circularity and sustainability agenda for long. And this partnership really has enabled the foundation to continue relying on Syensqo's input and expertise, while also supporting our efforts and help to define what circularity could mean in the chemical sector. And then we also partner with World Business Council for Sustainable Development, particularly on Global Circularity Protocol. And this is really, really important because it helps to establish, or aims to establish rather, a harmonized framework for circularity performance. And, this is currently, there is no internationally recognized standard per se for framework for circularity for sector as ours, right? And, when you look at circularity, for most part, people tend to think circularity as imagining recycling, right? And, but as we just discussed, for instance, some chemical solutions are invisible in so many applications. So we need to look at a different definition on that. And we're midstream, for instance, a Syensqo for midstream actor across the value chain. And we need to do our part, whether improving using low carbon or recycled raw materials or product durability. And we cannot do that alone, right? But we can help to advise what good would look like when it comes to setting a standard and a framework. So that's really helpful in that context. And very briefly, there is another collaboration example where we work together with ambitious initiative and an organization called Climate Impulse, for instance. So this is really where we're building a first ever plane powered by hydrogen to go around non-stop around the world using this revolutionary technology. And we're partnering, Syensqo being the main technological partner, alongside with UM6B University in Morocco and the OCP group. So again, we're actually building something that's new, that doesn't exist. And this groundbreaking endeavor promises a new set of standard for sustainable aviation in our sector towards net zero emissions. So again, without multidisciplinary cross-functional partnerships externally, things like this wouldn't be possible. And I think that's just really fundamentally important.
Amazing. Yeah, that building something brand new that hasn't existed before to prove that it can is so exciting, honestly.
Yeah.
Anne-Laure, last thought on collaboration and its future role in transforming the industry.
I'd like to maybe stick with one point that I made earlier on. Unlike other areas in the world of material, there is no mandate for sustainable products, no harmonized criteria to define what sustainable products are. And getting there will require radical collaboration within, and across value chain. And what we hear from our members, and we're starting to craft a piece of work on that, is a growing need to create that demand aggregation and signaling mechanism for those sustainable solutions with commonly agreed criteria and identify a mechanism to overcome the structural cost increase that comes with those sustainable solutions. So that's where my hope is at the moment, that we'll soon be able to craft something to, together with our member, again, create some further impact in the space.
I hope that will succeed, and we'll watch what's happening there, Anne-Laure. It's to me, I think, to offer thanks back to all three of you, really. If we gave ribbons or prizes for how well a conversation on the podcast aligned to the Sustainable Connections theme, I think you would have all won blue ribbons today with all the conversation about industry transformation and value chain collaboration. But in all seriousness, Titta, Anne-Laure, and Cristina, thank you so much for joining Sustainable Connections today. For all of you who are listening out there, if you're interested in the podcast and want to find more, they are all on your various platforms, from Spotify to Apple to what have you, but also on erm.com, our website. And if you're ever inclined to give us any feedback, we'd love to hear it so we can make Sustainable Connections better. For now, thanks again to all of our speakers, thanks to all of our listeners, and best wishes to everyone. Bye for now.